London is not the oldest city in the world. It is not the largest, but it may be the most indestructible, burned to the ground, plague-hollowed, blitzed from the air for 57 consecutive nights by the most powerful air force in the world. And every single time, it came back. Not slowly, not quietly, but with the kind of stubborn, furious energy that only comes from a place that has already lost everything once and decided it would never lose everything again. This is not a city that was handed greatness. It is a city that fought for it, bled for it, rebuilt itself from ash and rubble, and started over so many times that starting over became part of who it is. What you are about to see is not a textbook. It is not a list of kings and dates and battles. It is the real story, the full story, of how a cold, muddy riverbank became the most powerful city on earth, and how it survived long enough to still be standing today. Using advanced AI to bring motion and life back into centuries-old maps, forgotten medieval drawings, and long silent wartime photographs, we are not just going to tell you this story. You're going to watch it happen, street by street, century by century, fire by fire. From a small Roman river crossing in 43 AD, through plague and invasion and revolution and bombs falling from the night sky, all the way to the global city of 2026. This is 2,000 years of London compressed into one single journey. Every scar, every comeback, every moment where the city should have died and didn't. Let's begin at the beginning. The year is 43 AD. The place is a wide, grey bend in a river the locals call the Thames. There is no city here, no walls, no streets, no crowds, just two low gravel hills rising above the muddy floodplain, a handful of scattered Celtic settlements, and a river crossing that is awkward enough to matter. The people living here are not conquerors or kings. They are farmers, traders, and river people. They move grain and animal skins and simple goods between the coast and the interior. They have no idea that the ground beneath their feet is about to become the most important piece of land in the history of an entire island. Then Rome arrives. The Emperor Claudius sends 4 legions across the Channel, roughly 40,000 soldiers, the most powerful fighting force in the Western world. They do not come for the people. They do not come for the farmland. They come for the river crossing, because the Thames at this particular bend is the furthest point upriver that can be bridged, and whoever controls this crossing controls the movement of everything across the whole island. People, grain, soldiers, money, power. It is simple geography, but simple geography has started empires before. Within a decade, the Romans have built a timber bridge across the Thames, a working port on the northern bank, and a small but fast-growing settlement spreading outward from the water's edge. They call it Londinium. It is a garrison town, a trading post, a place where roads meet and goods change hands. It is nothing grand, nothing permanent-looking, nothing that would make you stop and stare, but Rome is watching it very carefully. Because Rome understands something the river people do not yet. The crossing is everything, and the town built around it is just getting started. Londinium is barely 17 years old when it is burned to the ground for the first time. It is 60 AD, and the fire does not come from a foreign enemy crossing the sea. It comes from inside the island itself. A queen of the Iceni tribe, a British people living in what is now Norfolk, has had enough of Roman rule. Her name is Boudicca, and what she builds in a matter of weeks is not just an army. It is a wave of rage that has been building for years under the weight of Roman taxes, Roman cruelty, and Roman contempt for the people they have conquered. Her army is estimated at 100,000 warriors. The Roman settlement of Camulodunum falls first. Then her forces turn toward Londinium. The Roman governor Paulinus faces a decision that has no good answer. Londinium cannot be defended with the soldiers he has. So he makes the brutal calculation that commanders have made throughout history when the numbers are impossible. He evacuates the military. He leaves the civilians behind. Boudicca's army enters the town and burns every single structure to the ground. The fire is so intense and so complete that archaeologists can still find its remains today, a distinct layer of red ash buried deep beneath the streets of modern London. The physical fingerprint of a city destroyed before it had the chance to become one. Ancient Roman historian Tacitus records that 70,000 people die across the 3 settlements Boudicca destroys. Rome crushes the rebellion within a year. Boudicca dies, by poison, by her own hand, according to most accounts. And then Rome does something that changes everything. Instead of walking away from the smoking ruins of Londinium, they rebuild it, bigger than before, with walls this time. By 100 AD, Londinium is the largest city in Roman Britain. It has learned its first hard lesson. Survival requires walls, and walls require believing the place inside them is worth defending. By the 2nd century AD, Londinium is no longer a garrison town. It is a city, a real one. The population swells to somewhere between 45,000 and 60,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the entire northwestern Roman Empire. Think about what that means for a place that barely existed 100 years earlier. A basilica longer than any other building in Roman Britain rises at the city's center. The governor's palace sits on the riverbank. A forum, a giant open marketplace and civic space, is laid out at the heart of the settlement, large enough to contain the entire modern Trafalgar Square inside its boundary. Merchants from Gaul, Syria, and North Africa crowd the docks. The Thames moves grain, leather, silver, and slaves in every direction. The Romans then spend nearly 4 decades building a massive defensive wall around the entire city. 2 miles of stone, 20 feet high, enclosing 330 acres of streets, buildings, and urban life. That wall will quietly define the shape and boundaries of London for the next 1,000 years. Long after the Romans are gone, the city will still be living inside the outline they drew. But Rome is weakening. And as the empire begins to pull apart at the edges in the 3rd and 4th centuries, Londinium, now sometimes called Augusta, briefly becomes a capital in its own right, a base for generals with large ambitions and restless armies. In 383 AD, a general named Magnus Maximus strips Britain of its legions and marches them toward Rome, chasing the emperor's throne for himself. He takes every soldier the island has. He never brings them back. By 410 AD, Rome officially withdraws from Britain entirely. The city that Rome built is left standing on the riverbank, staring at the horizon, trying to figure out what it is now that the people who built it are gone. What follows the Roman withdrawal is not a sudden collapse. It is something slower and in many ways stranger than that. It is a gradual forgetting. The population of Londinium crashes. The forum that once buzzed with merchants and officials falls completely silent. The basilica roof collapses under its own weight, and nobody comes to repair it. The streets that Roman engineers laid out with careful, geometric precision slowly disappear under creeping grass and piling rubble. By the 5th century, the walled city that once held 60,000 people may contain fewer than 5,000. Archaeologists call this period the Dark Earth, a layer of black soil that covers Roman London like a blanket pulled over something dead. It is the physical evidence of a city that simply stopped functioning, a place that forgot what it was supposed to be. Then the Anglo-Saxons arrive, not as conquerors exactly, but as settlers moving into a space that nobody is using anymore. They build a new trading settlement just outside the old Roman walls in an area now called Aldwych, and they give the place a new name. Londonwich. The city has already forgotten one identity and is building another. Then the Vikings come. Between 842 and 886 AD, Danish Viking forces attack London repeatedly. They burn it, they occupy it, they treat the abandoned Roman walls as a ready-made fortress and make themselves at home inside the bones of a city they had no part in building. In 871 AD, a great Viking army winters inside those walls while the remaining population flees to the surrounding countryside and waits. It takes Alfred the Great, King of Wessex, to finally push them out in 886 AD. He reclaims the city, moves the settlement back inside the Roman walls for safety, and gives the place yet another new name. Londonburg. 3 names. Destroyed twice, occupied once, abandoned and rebuilt and abandoned again, and it is barely getting started. In October 1066, a Norman duke named William crosses the English Channel, kills the English king at the Battle of Hastings, and rides toward London with an army at his back. He expects a fight. He expects walls and weapons and a city that will make him bleed for every street. What he gets is a meeting. London's merchants and civic leaders walk out to meet William before he reaches the gates and offer him something more useful than resistance. A deal. "We will accept you as our king," they tell him, "if you guarantee our rights and protect our trade." William looks at the city, looks at his army, and agrees. He is crowned King of England in Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day 1066, in a building that the king he just replaced had only finished constructing months earlier. Then, almost immediately, William begins building the Tower of London on the eastern edge of the city. It is part fortress, part palace, and part statement. An unmistakable message to every merchant, every nobleman, and every ordinary person standing on the riverbank below. I am here. I am permanent. Do not test this. Under Norman rule, London changes shape in ways that are still visible today. Wooden churches are replaced with stone ones. The street patterns that still define the oldest part of the city begin to lock into place. Westminster, a separate settlement sitting upriver, becomes the home of royal government and political power, while London itself remains the center of trade and money. That split between political power and financial power will define the relationship between the city and its rulers for the next 1,000 years. But something else is growing quietly inside London's merchant class. A dangerous idea. The idea that the city's wealth gives it the right to make demands of its kings. That trade and law matter just as much as swords and armies. That idea is about to change England forever. London enters the 17th century as one of the largest cities in Europe. 500,000 people packed into medieval streets that were designed for a tenth of that number. The houses lean toward each other across narrow alleyways, almost touching at the tops. Open sewers run between the buildings. Rats move freely through grain stores and bedrooms. The air is thick with smoke and the smell of waste. The city is not just overcrowded. It is a biological disaster with a very short fuse. In 1665, the fuse runs out. The Great Plague tears through London with a speed and brutality that the city has no answer for. In a single year, it kills an estimated 100,000 people, roughly 1 in every 5 Londoners. The wealthy load their belongings onto carts and flee to their country houses. The poor have no country houses to flee to. They are locked inside their own homes, a red cross painted on the door as a warning to everyone outside. Whole families die together in sealed rooms, while carts move slowly through the streets at night, collecting the bodies. The city is still trying to recover when, on the morning of September 2nd, 1666, a fire starts in a small bakery on a street called Pudding Lane. Within 4 days, it consumes 373 acres of the medieval city. 87 churches burn to their foundations. 13,000 houses burn. St. Paul's Cathedral, the ancient stone heart of London's spiritual life, standing for centuries, burns. The number of people who die in the fire itself is surprisingly small, but the damage to the city's sense of itself is total. The medieval London that had grown slowly and organically for 1,000 years is simply gone. What rises in its place is something new. Architect Christopher Wren designs a new St. Paul's, its great dome rising over the skyline in a way that still defines it today. 52 new churches go up in stone. Streets are widened. Building rules are introduced for the first time in the city's history. London did not choose to become a modern city. The fire made that choice for it. By 1800, London is the largest city on Earth. 1 million people living, working, and struggling inside a city that is growing faster than anyone can manage. By 1900, that number has reached 6 million. London is now the capital of an empire covering a quarter of the entire planet's land surface, pulling the wealth of India, Africa, Australia, and the Americas through its docks and banks and counting houses like a giant pump that never stops. But greatness and suffering are living side by side in Victorian London in ways that are almost impossible to make sense of. The same city that builds the Crystal Palace and hosts the Great Exhibition of 1851, a celebration of human progress visited by 6 million people from around the world, contains neighborhoods so overcrowded and filthy that a working-class child in some districts cannot expect to live past the age of 5. The wealth flowing through London's financial centers and the misery packed into its back streets exist within walking distance of each other, and almost nobody in power thinks this is a problem worth solving. Then the 20th century arrives, and it arrives hard. In the Second World War, the German Air Force begins bombing London on September 7, 1940, and does not stop for 57 consecutive nights. The campaign is called the Blitz. Over 43,000 civilians are killed. 1 million London homes are damaged or destroyed. The docks that helped build the British Empire burn for days at a stretch, the smoke visible from miles away. But the people of London do something that nobody who ordered the bombing had fully planned for. They refuse to leave. They sleep in underground stations on makeshift beds, packed together in long rows beneath the city while bombs fall on the streets above. They share food with strangers. They emerge every morning into streets that may look completely different from the night before and walk to work anyway. Firefighters, air raid wardens, and ambulance drivers, most of them ordinary civilians with no military training at all, hold the city together hour by hour and night by night. The scars from those 57 nights are still written into London streets today. Entire neighborhoods rebuilt in plain post-war concrete where rows of Victorian houses once stood. Gaps in mismatched buildings that a careful eye can still read as the outlines of bomb sites 7 decades later. London held, but it paid for every single night of it. Today, London is home to 9 million people, speaking over 300 languages. Let that number sit for a moment. 300 languages in a single city. On the same riverbank, where a small group of Celtic farmers once moved goods between the coast and the interior without any idea that the ground beneath them would one day become this. It is one of the world's great financial centers and one of its most culturally diverse cities at the same time. The financial district that Roman merchants first built on the northern bank of the Thames sits a 10-minute walk from neighborhoods shaped by Caribbean, South Asian, and West African communities who came to this city in the decades after the Second World War and made it something it had never quite been before. Something louder, something more complicated, something more alive. And underneath all of it, the old city is still there. The Roman walls are still buried in the basements of office buildings. The street called London Wall follows exactly the line that Roman engineers surveyed and marked out 2,000 years ago. The Thames still runs where it always ran. The city has been rebuilt so many times that it is essentially a new place built on top of the bones of every version of itself that came before. If there is one thing that 2,000 years of London's history teaches us, it is this. Cities do not survive because they are protected from hard times. They survive because enough people, in enough moments of genuine crisis, decide that this place is worth staying for, worth rebuilding, worth fighting for, with nothing more than stubbornness and the flat refusal to accept that it is finished. London has been burned to the ground, plague-hollowed, invaded, occupied, bombed from the air for 57 consecutive nights. It has lost its empire, its certainty, and its sense of itself more than once. But it always comes back. It always rebuilds. It always finds a reason to keep going. The city that refused to die is still refusing. And something tells you it always will. 2,000 years of fire, invasion, plague, and reinvention. And London is still standing, still growing, still refusing to be anything less than itself. That is what this city's story is. Not a straight line from small to great, not a clean rise to power with a tidy ending, but a long, messy, painful, remarkable fight to survive, won over and over again by ordinary people who simply refused to give up on the place they called home. If this journey through 2,000 years of London gave you something, a new way of seeing the city, a detail you had never heard before, a moment where it all clicked into place, then there is so much more waiting for you. Every great city has a story like this one. Every great empire has a collapse worth understanding. Hit subscribe and come with us on the next journey. And as always, we'll see you in the past.